Hi, friend. I hope you are well and enjoying season 5 so far. I need to thank some very important people before we get back to the story. I want to give a special thank you to JT Hosack for your research on this part of the Negligence series. I also want to thank Jackie Moranty for helping me to co-produce this season, as well as writing and voice acting. I need to thank my Ko-Fi and patron supporters, CS on Patreon. Thank you for joining. I also need to thank Michelle Marsh as well as Lisa Woolridge for your generous donations on KO-FI. Your support means everything to me, and if you want to support this show, you can check out the links available in my link tree in the show notes below. Patron subscribers get early access to ad-free episodes as well as exclusive merchandise included in your patron subscription. I'm also excited to announce that I will be going to CrimeCon this year in Las Vegas, April 29th through May 1st. And if you want to join me, CrimeCon is now offering 10% off to anybody who registers using promo code True Consequences. That's right. You can save 10% just for listening to True Consequences. I hope to see you there. I'd love to meet you. Okay, I think that's all for the housekeeping announcements. Thank you again for the support. I hope you are enjoying this season. My name is Eric Carter-Landin, and this is True Consequences, Negligence, the Dylan Redwine story. This podcast deals with themes and topics that may not be suitable for young audiences. Listener discretion is advised. When we last spoke, Dylan was reported missing after a court-ordered visit with his father over Thanksgiving. Elaine, Cory, and Mike drove from Monument to Bayfield and immediately started searching for Dylan. This would mark the beginning of a decade of pain and heartbreak for those closest to Dylan. Let's get started on this episode and discuss the search for Dylan Redwine. November 19th, 2012 marked one of the most heartbreaking periods in the Durango Bayfield area. After arriving in the area late at night, Elaine Hall, along with her husband Mike and her son Cory, had already met with the Bayfield marshal to get an update on where the search for Dylan stood. Here is what we know so far. First of all, Dylan did not want to see his dad for Thanksgiving break. He begged his mom to not make him go. He told his friends that he did not want to go. He was only excited to see his friends that lived in the Bayfield area. Elaine went so far as to ask her attorney, Amber Harrison, if there was any way that she could get away with not sending Dylan to Mark. Her lawyer told her that because it was a court order, she was required to send Dylan, and that if she wanted to change the custody agreement, they would have to do that at a later date. And despite all of this, Dylan's relationship with Mark was so damaged that he still had no interest in seeing him. Which is why, when his mom asked him if he arrived safely, he simply said yes, with a frowny face emoji. Secondly, while traveling to Durango, Dylan messaged his friends a photo of the plane, and he made plans to meet up with his friend Ryan on the morning of the 19th. Dylan and Ryan planned to meet up at 6 a.m. at Ryan's grandmother's home. Ryan woke up early on the morning of the 19th, but Dylan never showed at Ryan's house. And finally, there is video footage of Dylan and Mark in the Durango Walmart on the evening of the 18th. This is believed to be the last time Dylan was seen alive by anyone other than Mark Redwine. According to what Mark told the marshal's office, he claimed that on November 19th, Dylan went missing. Mark claimed that he left the home at 7:30 a.m. and returned at 11:30 a.m. He claimed that Dylan was not home when he returned. He called the police at 6 p.m. This was after Elaine had started calling the marshal's office and accused Mark of not contacting them, even though he told her he had. Let's listen to what Mark said when asked about the search.
Well, there was some discussion that he had had with me the night before about leaving with me so I could drop him off in the Bayfield area with one of his friends that had been trying to text him or he had been communicating with. Mm-hmm. You know, as he indicated to me that he was up till 4 o'clock the morning before and that he was tired from being in the airport most of the day in his travel from Colorado Springs to Durango. I laughed at him kind of jokingly because I know him. If he ain't got to get up, he's not likely to get up, and he's not the kind of kid that's going to get up at 6:30 if he doesn't have to. But, you know, his friends are important, and I know they're important to me, so, you know, there was a possibility, but it doesn't surprise me that he elected not to get up when I left, and when I left and he acknowledged that everything that I was saying to him and that I would be back, he knew that when I came back I would be working on getting him down to his friends, and that's part of the struggle that we all have is, you know, what happened to him between the time I left and the time I got back, and that's what nobody seems to be able to answer.
Exactly. Can you tell me about your plans for Thanksgiving?
Well, because he was with me for such a short period of time, we had touched on a few things. One of the things we talked about was going to my brother David's house in Castle Rock. I know his friends were important to him, so we were wanting to make sure that he had adequate time to be with his friends. You know, basically the plan was Monday and Tuesday he would spend with his friends. Maybe Wednesday, you know, we had talked a little bit maybe about going bowling or doing something as an activity, not with just me and him, but with his friends included. And then we'd have Thanksgiving Day to ourselves. Or there was possibility that we could travel on Wednesday and get to my brother's house. So, you know, none of that ever got finalized. I mean, we were just focusing on the next day and what we were going to do and how that was going to take place. And that's as far as we really ever got. You know, I know his friends are important to him, and I certainly don't expect him to spend a week with me and spend every waking moment with me when he's grown up in this community and he has tons of people around here that love and care about him.
Now that you've heard Mark's side of the story, I'd like you to listen to Elaine discussing what happened after she arrived in Bayfield.
If you recall, throughout the evening of November 18th and the early morning hours of November 19th, making calls to law enforcement?
Yes.
That document refresh your recollection as to making calls?
Yes.
And to the best of your memory, to the best of your memory, fair to say you called them repeatedly?
Yes.
May I approach and retrieve the document? You may. So you arrive in the Bayfield, Durango area around 2:30 in the morning, and you go to the marshal's office.
Yes.
What happens there?
We meet with deputy, I believe, and I can't even remember his name, and basically just inform them, you know, of what I know, which is very little at this point. And we hang around there for a little while, and then we go to my friend's house, who is where we are staying while we're here.
What friend was that?
Amber Harrison.
And Ms. Harrison also served as your attorney in the divorce proceeding at some point, right?
Yes.
And did you stay overnight with Ms. Harrison?
We stayed with her the whole time. We were here in Durango looking for Dylan.
Approximately how long did you sleep that night after you arrived in the Bayfield, Durango area?
I don't think I did sleep.
What was the reason for that, Ms. Hall?
I was stressed out because I didn't know where my son was.
And in the days and weeks ahead, what types of efforts did you, as Dylan's mother, engage in to try to find Dylan?
Everything I knew. I mean, we had driven up to Vallecito, standing in the middle of the road, just calling his name. I mean, we did foot searches with just my immediate family around Lemon, around Durango, everywhere up there. Then I had a really good friend of mine who worked for, at the time, the Pine River Times, and she started organizing searches and grids and things like that, and I just basically followed her lead because she was really organized.
When you say followed or lead, did you participate in those searches?
Yes,
You also meet with investigators?
yes,
How frequently were you meeting with investigators during that time period?
as often as they would meet with me. I mean, I bugged them.
What?
I bugged them.
Bugged them. I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Okay.
When you say you bugged them, what do you mean by that?
It meant that I was calling, or I would just show up at the sheriff's office in Bodo and just show up, see if they had any answers, find out what they were doing. We went to the search and rescue and were there for a while, and I mean, just anybody who could help me, I was knocking on the door.
And as the weeks and months went by after November 12th, what was going on for you during that time? After November 18th, 2012.
I mean, I was frantic. Like I said earlier, it was so surreal. You don't expect anything like this to happen to you. And, you know, I figured he was safe because he was with his dad, and I was devastated that no one knew where my son was.
And were you aware from your conversations with law enforcement during this time that different tips and leads were coming in, they were investigating those?
Yes, I knew there were different tips and leads. They didn't necessarily tell me what they were, but yes, I knew that things were coming in.
And when you were out and about, is it fair to say you were just hoping to see Dylan or find Dylan wherever you were?
Yes.
Elaine was quoted in the press saying, quote, "We had driven up to Vallecito, just standing in the middle of the road, just calling his name. We did foot searches, just me and my immediate family, and anybody who could help me. I was knocking on everyone's door." Elaine and Cory were beside themselves with grief and fear, and they wanted to do whatever it would take to bring Dylan home. But let's backtrack a little bit and go back to the day that Dylan went missing. It's important to take note of the behavior of everyone around the family currently. We just heard from Mark and Elaine, which gives us some clues into the dynamic there. Something that later came out in the investigation was Mark's behavior during the search. On November 19th, Mark sent 4 text messages to Dylan. The text messages started at about 8:40 a.m., with the final message being sent at 2:43 p.m. Cell phone tower records showed that Mark drove from Vallecito, where he lived, to Durango and back during that time. Mark also made 7 attempts to call Dylan before finally reporting him missing at 6 p.m. on the evening of November 19th. Mark's last attempt to reach his son was 9:32 p.m. And while Mark was making calls and sending texts to Dylan's phone, search and rescue teams were searching the forest and streams near Mark's home for any trace of Dylan. And a member of the search and rescue team testified that Mark Redwine's lights went out at 11 p.m. on the night of November 19th. Let's listen to them talk about that night.
In most cases, I'll start a small circle and get wider and wider and wider until she picks up on a direction of travel. And that's what I did. Small property. I worked a little yard on the north side, and I got nothing. And then I worked around the house and just kept getting concentrically bigger with my search pattern.
Is this generally referred to as trailing?
Yes.
And then were you able to develop a trail from the odor on the pillowcase as you were doing this circular?
No, and I kept going back and working it. Eventually, I got a little bit of indication from my dog, especially when I went out towards the cattle guard. So the front of the house before the road, 10 Road 500, there's a small cattle guard on his driveway. And it was in that area that I picked up on a little bit of scent there, which took me a little way south on 500, but then it dissipated immediately, which is unusual. Being that fresh, it should have been a very positive indication by the dog.
You talked about that distance. Ultimately, were you able to use that pillowcase to find a trail for Dylan Redwine?
Ultimately, no.
Okay, thank you. And so what search efforts did you do after you were unable to continue on the course with the pillowcase?
That same night, or?
Yes, that same night.
I started working in a grid fashion to the east of the house through some private properties and ultimately to the river, the stream, which is not that far away. And I wound up working until probably 12:30 that evening.
Did more people come to assist you in your search?
A few others, yes. Another dog handler. I had a helper. We try to have a helper with a dog handler. They can keep eyes on things because you're concentrating on your dog's indication and ear twitches and head jerks and things like that. So they prevent me from, walking off a cliff type scenario. But yeah, so another dog handler was there that evening.
Were there also, you said a few people helping you, were there also people just visually looking in the woods with flashlights, calling out, things like that?
There was a few people. I can't recall because I get very focused on working my dog. So I don't know how many SAR folks showed up, SAR Search and Rescue. I don't know how many showed up that night.
And when it got dark out, did you begin to become concerned for the welfare of the missing?
Oh, absolutely, because it was getting chillier.
Uh-huh.
There was ice forming on the rocks along the stream bank, which is, slip hazard and easy to fall and whatever.
You still have your down coat on as you were searching?
Oh, absolutely.
And then you and the other searchers that had joined you, did you say what time a night you had searched until you finally stopped?
Yeah, I was the last one to leave the scene, and it was, 12:30, quarter to 1 someplace. I got home around 1 o'clock, and it's about a 20-minute drive.
Okay. And then what were your concerns as 1 o'clock a.m. Rolled around?
How it was a survivable night for somebody that age, with a little, lack of a better word, common sense. But he would have had a miserable night out on his own. Or if he had slipped on the icy rocks on the river and been knocked out or swept into the water, that's a whole different story there.
It's fair to say it was a pretty dangerous situation.
Yes, it's a fast-moving stream, and if somebody that size would have slipped and fell in, he would have been washed downstream.
And then also, just generally speaking, not having a coat in that temperature out there.
Exactly.
Was that concerning as well?
Absolutely.
As you were working that night, did you ever have contact with the defendant after your initial conversation with him?
No, I did not.
Was that unusual to you?
Absolutely.
Can you just explain a little bit to the jury, please?
So from my personal experience, being in the same situation many times with family members, the parent, they never want to leave our side. And it can be, I don't want to say annoying because I respect what they're going through, but they get in the way. So, I didn't have any of that. And they're constantly wanting to know what we found, if we found anything, what we're doing, why we're not trying hard, or why we're not staying all night, things to that effect.
Did you ever see him come out of the house at all to check in?
I did not.
And you had testified already that you were there around 1 o'clock.
Yes.
Were you close to his house around 11 p.m.?
My car was parked directly across from his house.
At this time, Your Honor, I'm just going to ask to publish what's been previously admitted as People's 24.
Sorry, that's fine.
What did you notice, if anything, at 11 o'clock p.m. the night of November 19th, 2012?
Lights in the house being turned off.
Was that notable to you at that time?
Very notable to me.
So, Mr. Vreeland, you were explaining something, but let me first be specific and walk through this and then let you explain. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, pointing at the photograph there, is there a specific light that went off at 11 o'clock that you recall?
The outside porch light, which you can see on the upper, by the front door, off to the left.
Okay. And what about the lights inside the home? Did those...
Eventually, all the lights were turned off.
By 11 o'clock?
Around 11 o'clock.
Did that surprise you? And I'm not talking about your experience yet, But just in general, given the circumstances you were in that night, did that surprise you to see the lights go off in the house?
Absolutely. Most people tend to turn every light on and make their house a beacon so a missing person can find their way home, whether it be a spouse or a child.
So by a beacon, do you mean if, for example, someone's up in the woods because they've walked off
Absolutely.
to go fishing? Or
We've had people honking their horn and, trying to, in case the person's up, within hearing range.
And then if they are walking down trying to find the home.
Right, they'll be able to see it. It's a very dark area.
Okay. And but when you say very dark area, are there any streetlights?
There's absolutely no street lights, and like you said before, half the homes are vacant that time of year.
So pitch black type
Pitch
of thing.
black.
So what was your reaction seeing all the lights inside and outside the house go off at 11 o'clock?
It's odd. It's very odd.
Were you still working at that time?
I was.
And you talked about some of the conditions that were dangerous at that point. Is that why you continued to work out there?
Yes.
Was there a point in time finally when it got to be too much for the night and you broke off and started again in the morning?
Yeah, it just got too dangerous to be out there in the pitch black working off a headlamp down by the river.
Okay. And then just based on your life experience and your experience out doing this kind of work, have you ever seen anything like that before, the lights going out like that at 11 p.m.?
I have not.
And then what was decided about the plan moving forward after you were out there till 1 p.m. and then stopped for the evening?
I got a radio call from our Ron Corcus, who's in charge of La Plata County Search and Rescue, and it said they were going to reconvene at 7 o'clock. Then I wound up talking to him on the cell phone, and he asked if I would, they're going to meet at one of our firehouses down south, and he asked me if I could manage or IC the lake area and the volunteers that came up to the lake at 7 a.m.
What's the IC?
Incident Command.
Does that mean that you're in charge of the search operation up there?
Yes.
And then that next morning you mentioned around 7 a.m. How does that correspond with sunrise and when daylight roughly starts to come?
It starts getting light enough where you can work safely.
At 7?
Yeah.
And did you in fact respond up there at 7 a.m. and come up with a plan for the day?
I was much earlier.
You were earlier?
Yeah.
When did the search efforts resume the next day? This would be November 20th.
Yeah, it was approximately 7 o'clock. Volunteers. So it's an all-volunteer organization. People started showing up, and I just started giving out assignments based on different skill sets.
Okay. And did you continue to stage right across the street from the home?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, you heard that correctly. While Elaine and Cory and others were yelling into the forest, looking around everywhere that they could think, doing all that they could do to find Dylan, and while human remains detection dogs were combing the Redwine property, Mark Redwine turned off all his lights and presumably went to sleep. And this is actually quite disturbing in so many ways, aside from the fact that it took way too long to report Dylan missing. Would a worried parent turn off all of their lights and go to sleep in a situation like this? Now, I can't pretend to speak for all parents out there, but if my son were missing, I guarantee you I would not be able to sleep, and I certainly would not turn off my lights, because I would hope that the lights of my home would help guide my son back home. The search continued to grow into the late hours of November 20th as more people in the community became aware and decided to help the family search for Dylan. On November 24th, cadaver dog teams were sent to the area of Vallecito Lake, where Dylan's scent had been found. Divers were later sent to the lake to determine if he had drowned or had been injured, but they did not find anything that brought them closer to finding Dylan. Let's listen to the testimony of the dog handler.
So at this time, in that same day of August 5th, 2013, were you going to search Mark Redwine's residence?
They asked me if I would be willing to have Molly search outside of Mr. Redwine's residence.
Okay. And generally speaking, we talked a little bit about the information you had going in, but it would have been that there's a missing child, and you would have at least known that he had been seen at that house last?
I think what I knew was that there was video that Dylan had arrived at the airport and he had been at Walmart. I don't recall how anyone knew if he had been at his father's house last.
Okay. And you were going to search the exterior first of his father's house?
Yes.
Did you have a search warrant or consent to do that?
The La Plata County Sheriff investigators made a phone call to Mr. Redwine and asked him by phone if a dog could sniff around his house on the outside.
And did he give consent for that?
I heard a male voice say yes.
Okay. Now, what did you do in terms of, did you drive over there with investigators?
I believe we had a rental vehicle, the other handler and I, so we drove there separate, but in a caravan.
Okay. At this time, Judge, can I publish People's 24 previously admitted? Yes. Does that look consistent with the residence that you did the searching work on that day?
Yes.
Okay. Then was there a driveway with a truck, a Chevy truck in there at the time that you went to the home as well?
There was a Chevy truck parked near the house.
Okay. So can you explain to the jury when you arrived at the house what you did with Molly?
When we arrived, I took her off her traffic lead and gave her a command to search for the odor of human remains and just followed behind her as she moved through. I don't know how large the property is. And we went around the house. There was some other smaller outbuildings and even an open septic system on the property.
Was there like a camper trailer thing there?
You know, I recall some sort of something, either a storage container or a camper, something of that nature. That was, would be, is that the south side of the house? That direction? This is the east side?
This would be you facing the east side of the house.
Yeah, so beyond the house, out of the picture.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask you to just explain to the jury if Molly had any trained final responses on the exterior of the house, but I know it's been a long time. Did you bring your reports if you need them to refresh your memory?
I can use my reports, but I think I can recall quite a bit of what she did.
That's great. Can you explain to the jury what Molly did when you searched the exterior of Mark Redwine's residence?
Okay. She was off traffic lead, and as we began moving through the area, she provided her trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains near the garage doors, which would be on the, if I'm cardinally not challenged, it's on the east side of the house, near to the south.
Okay. What we're looking at here on the left?
Yes. She ended up providing 6 trained final response to the odor of human remains outside of the residence, by the garage, front door, under an open staircase that's on the south side, and it was just dirt.
Mm-hmm. Can you see the bottom couple of steps right there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then she went up the open staircase and provided a trained final response on a small platform, which was near an open window. She indicated there's a creek or a little body of water that runs maybe along the roadway and then tucks to the north. And at the edge of the yard, she stuck her nose down in the creek and then backed out and gave her trained final response to the odor of human remains. And then she provided a trained final response by a small shed in what I would describe as the southwest corner behind the house.
Okay. What are some reasons a dog might indicate on water? You said a creek, right?
Oh, well, one thing could be is, do you have human remains, generic human remains, in a waterway that's flowing into there? My experience has been that water bolsters odor. So if there's decomposing body on a hillside, the dogs will often indicate to the waterway that's below it just by the nature of the rain coming down and then drains down into there. So they're telling you there's odor down there.
What about like washing hands in there with something on it, things like that? Can that cause a dog to indicate on an area like that?
You mean somebody just washes their hands in a creek with soap and water?
No, with someone that human remains.
Boy, I'm going to say that based on the time when we were there, I would not say that would have caused it. To be on the safe side, outside of the possibility of the dog indicating.
Okay.
I think I answered that correctly.
Sure. Were there areas of like entrance and exit to the home that were indicated training final response?
One of her indications was by the front door, on this side of the house.
Okay. And now you've talked about, well, let me ask about a few other areas. There was the camper trailer that we talked about. Any indications on the camper trailer?
Molly did not indicate to the odor of human remains around that or at that.
Any trained final responses on the septic area?
She did not indicate at the septic area.
And then you said there was a truck in the driveway, a Chevy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you bring Molly to the truck to do that search as well?
The pickup truck that was there was close to the garage door on that southwest corner. So I don't recall if it was facing or backed in, but there was 6 to 10 feet between the garage and the truck. And where her first indication, trained final response was, because I'm looking for just information, I worked her around the truck, off lead, and she did not indicate at the truck or on the vehicle.
Okay. So it's fair to say there were a lot of areas that Molly didn't indicate.
That's correct.
And you said you've searched houses where there's no indications at all, right?
Correct.
So what was your conclusion drawn from the trained final responses at this point in time?
Based on my training experience with Canine Molly, there was a large amount of human remains odor present on the exterior of that property.
Now, by this time, the dogs had been walking through Mark's home, and they did signal to human remains having been probable in several places in Mark's home. All the while, search teams continued to look for Dylan all over the area. Elaine was beside herself and was speaking with the press to get more awareness in the public about Dylan's case. The feelings of fear and hopelessness must have been overwhelming. Mark had not been seen in public in days, and this created a lot of animosity and suspicion towards Mark. Here's Elaine discussing why she believed Dylan was a victim of foul play.
And Dylan talked to me, It's not like we didn't have conversations. I know how he felt all the time, because he was not shy about telling me how he felt. Well, I know he didn't disappear. He just didn't disappear out of thin air. I know he didn't run away. I know that he didn't hitchhike, because that's not Dylan's character. He would have called. He would have either called me or called his brother or called, his friends. It's hard, I have my own theories in my head, but I know what he didn't do, and I know how he didn't vanish.
On November 27th, 8 days after Dylan went missing, Mark finally made an appearance at a vigil for Dylan. 2 days later, police would execute a search warrant on the home of Mark Redwine, in response to the dogs alerting to human remains being present in the home. During the search, the team found trace amounts of blood in various places in Mark's home. There was not much more in the way of physical evidence that could point the investigators in the right direction in terms of finding Dylan or his remains. Thanksgiving turned into Christmas, and then came the New Year, and still there was no sign of Dylan, and Mark stopped communicating with anyone related to the search team, including police. On February 13th, 2013, another search with canines was conducted. One dog pointed to the scent of human remains on Mark Redwine's Dodge pickup truck, which included the bed of the truck. As a follow-up to that trained final response, human remains detection dogs searched for remains closer to as well as inside of Mark's home. Days turned to months, and it was not until April 2013 when police and searchers turned their attention to the area of Middle Mountain. This was because bone fragments had been located by a hiker in the area. Let's listen to Elaine's husband, Mike, talk about an experience he had with Mark near Middle Mountain Road.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please start by introducing yourself to the jury by your full name?
My name is Michael Hall.
Could you spell your last name for the court reporter, please?
Hall.
Is Elaine Hall currently your wife?
Yes.
When were the two of you married?
August of 2015.
Do you know Cory Redwine?
Yes.
How do you know him?
Elaine Hall's son, my stepson.
And did you know Dylan Redwine as well?
Yes.
How long have you known Cory and Dylan Redwine?
October of 2009.
And did you meet them in the context of your relationship with Elaine Hall?
Yes.
Were you involved in their lives as children?
From October of 2009 on, yes.
What about Mark Redwine? Was he involved in those search efforts that you were involved in?
I know of one.
Which one was that?
It was a search that started down on Florida Road.
And did that go up around the area of Lemon Reservoir potentially?
Yes.
Is that anywhere near Middle Mountain Road?
No.
Was he ever involved in any of the search efforts up on Middle Mountain Road?
Not that I'm aware of.
But you were?
I was.
So did you frequent the Vallecito area over the next few months as searches were going on?
Yes.
Did you help with tips across the country about Dylan sightings, for example?
Yes.
Were there a lot of Dylan sightings?
Yes.
Were there some of them that even brought hope to you and Elaine Hall, as you might have been sighted out of state at times?
Yes.
Were you asked to look at that, surveillance footage, things like that, and ultimately rule out whether it was Dylan or not?
Yes.
Did that go on and on up until Middle Mountain Road would reopen in June of 2013?
Yes.
And then eventually, when the snow melted and it reopened, did you all become aware that there was going to be a big search effort on Middle Mountain Road?
Yes.
Before we get to that, I want to ask you about a specific date and time, April 23rd of 2013. Was this one of the times that you were in Vallecito helping with search efforts for Dylan?
Yes.
And what were you doing that morning of April 23rd, 2013?
Well, there was a search of the lake because we brought in a boat to search the lake. There was also a cofferdam being built, and so I was there for that.
So this was 5 months after Dylan went missing, and there were still searches going on at the lake?
Yes.
Okay. Was Middle Mountain Road still closed at this time?
Yes.
And then what did you do that morning while you were waiting for the lake search to start?
While I was waiting for the lake search to start, I drove up Middle Mountain Road a few minutes.
Had you been up there before?
No.
Okay. And how far or where did you go up Middle Mountain Road as you were waiting?
I went to the first hairpin turn.
Did you characterize that as a mile or two, or what do you know about that?
It's probably about 4 to 5 minutes up the road.
Okay. And when you went 4 to 5 minutes up the road, what did you do?
Pulled over.
Okay. Why'd you pull over?
Drank a lot of coffee that morning, and so we were going to get rid of some coffee.
Okay. And that's kind of a closed mountain dirt road. It's not. Is there any traffic coming out while you're relieving yourself?
Not that time of year. There's not a lot of traffic up there.
Did you, in fact, see one vehicle on that road that day?
Yes.
Tell the jury what you saw, please.
I saw Mark Redwine coming down Middle Mountain Road in a white Dodge Dakota truck.
That's a pickup truck?
Yes.
It's the one he owned back in November of 2012 and still owned in April of 2013?
Yes.
You recognize the truck?
Did recognize the truck.
Did you recognize him?
Yes.
How did you recognize him?
Well, from where I was standing, I was probably about 6 to 8 feet away.
You were able to see his face.
Yes.
Did it appear that he would have been able to see you?
Yes.
What did he do as he drive down the road?
Well, I mean, it appeared to me that he was trying to put a great deal of distance between him and I.
Why do you say that?
Because when I seen the truck, I turned around, started down the mountain, and he was nowhere in sight.
Okay. Did you go looking? Were you able to follow him, catch up?
Driving extremely fast. Yes, I did catch up with him eventually.
So where did you follow him to? Where did he go?
He was going down Middle Mountain Road, and I caught him when he was turning onto the asphalt of 501.
Okay. And how far did you follow him, and where did he ultimately go?
I followed him to around the corner of 501 where the intersection of 500 is, and then I turned up 500. He continued straight.
So, Mr. Hall, on that day, was there in fact a search of the lake?
Yes.
Defendant participate in that search?
No.
So everyone else was searching the lake on that morning except the defendant was other places?
Correct.
Did that raise suspicions for you?
Yes.
Did you then take efforts to see if the defendant would be back up on Middle Mountain Road?
Say that again.
Did you then take efforts on your own to see if you could catch if the defendant continued to go up on Middle Mountain Road?
Yes.
What did you do?
I placed cameras on Middle Mountain Road.
And were those like recording video cameras that catch everything, or were they a different kind of camera?
They were a game camera that was infrared, no flash.
So those would catch like images of movement?
Yes.
Are they the same things people use for deer hunting, things like that?
Yes.
Do you have any success with those cameras in the time that you put them up there?
I actually turned them over to law enforcement.
Okay. And is it fair to say that they're spotty in whether they actually get a moving vehicle on them?
They can be spotty.
Yeah. And so after that, I want to turn your attention to late June of 2012. So we're talking about April 23rd, and there's still searches of the lake. Did you become aware that the gate was going to open, the snow was going to melt, and law enforcement was going to do a wide-scale search of this area up here?
Yes.
What did you and your family being Cory Redwine and Elaine Hall, what did you all do when you heard that these searches were coming?
We came down for the search, and then that anything needed to be identified or whatever they needed, we were willing to help.
So you made sure that you were in town when they were going to do this?
Yes.
Was this a pretty well-known, publicized event in terms of community involvement, law enforcement involvement, and the scope of the search?
Yes.
So did you all, in fact, come down in late June?
Yes.
What was your involvement when the searches on Middle Mountain Road occurred?
To be there for support, anything that they needed, identify anything that they may find.
Was Mark Redwine available to identify items they'd found on that mountainside?
No.
When they found Dylan Redwine's personal items, the very few that they found, the shoe, scraps of clothing, and a sock, some earbuds, who did it fall upon to identify those items?
Myself and Cory.
And Elaine Hall was there too?
Yes.
Is that a difficult process for you?
Very.
Middle Mountain was searched on June 26th, 2013. Partial human remains were discovered in the area of Middle Mountain. The next day, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the remains belonged to Dylan Redwine. The bones were found 10 miles from Mark's home. Searchers also found a Nike Air Jordan shoe, size Youth 7, a shred of fabric, and underwear, earbuds, as well as torn bits of clothing. Investigators described the area as a, quote, dump site. Joe Gabbard, investigator with the La Plata County Sheriff's Office, said he was involved in multiple searches on the ground and coordinated helicopter searches. Found a bone that could have been a finger or toe in animal feces in the area where the partial remains were located. Gabbard also found a shoelace in the same area. Elaine was quoted saying, quote, "The worst part was finding Dylan's bones scattered on the mountain, but it was somewhat bittersweet because we had found him. We promised him we would find him. But he never should have gone missing in the first place." Elaine was in southwest Colorado at the time because of an organized grid search to search for Dylan was taking place. Then, on August 14th, 2013, Mark's home was searched for a second time. A canine named Molly searched his home months after Dylan disappeared. La Plata County Sheriff's Office asked for Gumman's help in August 2013, 9 months after Dylan disappeared. Gumman said she first brought Molly to the La Plata County Sheriff's Office where the canine was presented with 3 evidence bags. She signaled the scent of human remains on 2 of them. One contained a pair of tennis shoes and the other a pair of blue jeans. She also later signaled for a blue shirt that had been in the 3rd evidence bag. Gumman later brought the dog to Mark's house where she said, quote, "There were a large amount of human remains odor detected on the exterior of that property." Inside the house, Gumman said Molly signaled that she detected the presence of human remains 7 times on the main floor and made no indications that she smelled anything on the 2nd level. She said it was possible that there were multiple signals because a body had been moved. Molly signaled 12 times on Middle Mountain Road but did not find remains herself. She also indicated human remains odor from the back of a pickup truck that Mark owned. It wasn't until a couple of hikers found a skull in the woods in 2015 that investigators started to piece together what really happened to Dylan. Let's listen to one of those hikers describe what happened now.
How long have you lived in Colorado, Miss Foster?
6, 7 years now?
Okay. And I want to take your attention back to the fall of 2015. Were you living in Colorado at that time?
Yes.
Where were you living?
Bayfield?
Okay. And specifically November 1st of 2015. Do you recall that day?
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing on that day?
Me and my husband were going on a hike
Okay. Where were you hiking?
on Middle Mountain Road.
All right. And do you recall where on Middle Mountain you were hiking?
At the very top.
Very top.
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall the name of that area or just that it was at the top?
No, just as at the top of Middle Mountain Road.
Okay. And tell me about your hike that day. Was there anything unusual that happened?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us, please.
Me and my husband, we were hiking down a slope. We decided to go after we ate lunch underneath a tree. And we saw some beautiful trees coming up, so we decided to go walk down an area. And went a little ways in, little streams everywhere. It was very beautiful. And then my husband picked up something and he said, "Hey, honey, what do you think this is?" And I saw it, and I could see it in his hands. I was right behind him, a few steps behind him. I didn't know exactly until I got up right with him. I took it from his hands, and immediately I knew it was a human skull.
And what happened next?
He disagreed with me. He said, "No, it's not." I said, "Yeah, baby, it is." And he said, "Well, what do you want to do now?" I said, "Well, we got to go turn it in. We got to go back." And he's like, "Well, I want to walk around for a little bit longer." So I said, "Okay, I prefer to come back." But there was no service up there. We had to, go back down Middle Mountain Road, at least get to the store to get service. So we decided to go walk a little bit more, and we went a little further down. There were streams that came out to a bigger stream, and then across from that, there was still snow on the ground. And we're not very used to snow, so my husband was very excited about seeing snow, and he decided he wanted to go on to the other side. And we crossed it by a big log that was laying over, connecting both sides. We crossed over,
soon as we crossed over, though, we noticed that there were prints in the snow that looked like bear prints to us. We knew it's middle, Bear Mountain for a reason. So we decided to turn back and go back. I said, yeah, we need to get back. Don't want to come in contact with the mama bear and her cubs, and I need to go and find out who I needed to contact and say I found a human skull in the woods.
Now, had you carried the skull with you during that whole hike? Or?
No. He set it back down.
And I want you to describe that in detail for me. How did he go about doing that? Did he drop it? Did he?
No, he didn't drop it. He just literally set it down.
Okay. And at any time from the moment that you saw him pick it up to the time that he put it back down and you all walked on, did you see it get damaged in any way, shape, or form?
No. I believe there was a small little stream, because like I said, there was multiple little streams everywhere. There was a little stream right next to where he saw it, where he picked it up. And I believe he set it right in that little stream, so maybe it wouldn't go anywhere, is why I asked him, I was like, why'd you do that? And he's like, I don't want it to go anywhere, if I remember correctly. That's what he said.
Okay. When you found it, was it on the dry land or in the water?
Yeah, it was on a little dry land. There was a little patch of green grass, little streams all around. It was just lying right there.
Okay, do you remember if it was with the round part up or if the round part was down?
I don't remember, because that part, you had to ask him when I
Okay.
picked it up.
Next time on Negligence, the Dylan Redwine story.
Well, and I know not everyone likes law enforcement. I'm okay with that, and this is not fun.
I know that we need that in our society. Mm-hmm. Now, but I'll be honest with you, I've never been a big fan of law enforcement.
And that's all right. I'm okay. But
I try to treat them with respect.
I appreciate that.
I try to, be understanding that they got a difficult job and they're probably not making a lot of money to do it. Mm-hmm. And, just to give you an example, anytime I get pulled over, I always put my hands on the steering wheel, because I want the officer coming up to be able to see that he ain't got nothing to worry about, or that I'm not fumbling for something, or there's any reason for him to have any concern.
And they appreciate it.
Until he gets up there, and then if I need to get in the glove box to get my license and registration, or the registration, I acknowledge to him. And not all people think of those kinds of things, but I do that just because I think it makes their job easier.
It does. And I think, and I know, again, you're not a fan of law enforcement, and that's all right. We're doing absolutely everything that we can to find Dylan.
And I know you are, but you got to admit that, for me, it's very frustrating, because I know that there's things that you guys are doing behind the scenes that nobody sees. And that's good. But, that's where I think, with everybody else, we all start to get frustrated because we're not seeing with our eyes what we think we should be seeing.
Thanks for listening. Stay safe, New Mexico.